Hi dears, welcome to English classes at RADHIKA. Aristotle's Observations on Poetry and Tragedy is a chapter taken from Literary Criticism, which is a paper for the 4th semester BA English Language and Literature students. Let's discuss what is meant by poetry and tragedy in the Aristotelian perspective. At first, we have to analyze the Aristotelian observations on poetry, or what are his concepts of poetry, its nature especially. We know that Aristotle was the student of Plato, and while he is writing his criticism, all the criticisms or all the observations made by Plato was there in his mind. So actually he is cutting the points which were formulated by his teacher. Poetry is an imitation, that is mimesis of life, actions and emotions. So at first he is agreeing with his teacher Plato by saying that poetry is just an imitation of life, actions and emotions. It differs from history as it deals with universals rather than particulars. In the next point, he is telling that poetry is far more developed and refined than history, because history is tending towards particular, but poetry is universal. Poetry is telling about universal thing, the problems of many people or almost all people, while history is telling about the life of a particular person or a particular dynasty. We know that Plato was not at all very much interested in poetry. He gave much importance to history and philosophy in his Republic. But Aristotle is not at all ready to accept the points of view of Plato. Then poetic expression is creative and uses rhythm, language and harmony. Uh, then he is telling about how far poetry is very important, because in addition to the imitation of life, it has some creative elements. Along with that, it is rhythmic and the language is very refined, and a kind of harmony or peacefulness is there for the poetry, or a kind of mingling everything in a very peaceful manner, in a very proportional manner is there in poetry. Then history is just a write-up, philosophy is also just a write-up, but all these elements are there in poetry. So according to Aristotle, poetry is far more developed or higher than philosophy as well as the history. Poetry is categorized into different genres: epic, tragedy, comedy, etc. We know that a lot of genres are there in poetry or literature, like epic, tragedy, comedy, etc. Aristotle's observations on poetry, especially on its function. What are the functions of a poem according to Aristotle? Poetry serves to provide moral and philosophical insights. It's just an imitation. He agrees with the fact that it is just an imitation, and it draws happiness in the mind of the readers. Anyway, it has some moral and philosophical functions. A poetry um, can be taught morality or philosophy or something like that. It educates and entertains by representing human experiences. It is not at all pleasing, but it is educating, or it is the representation of human experience. Poetry is an action or an imitation of life or experience of human beings. It conveys deep truths through artistic representation. We know that poetic truth is the ultimate truth according to Aristotle, but Plato has told that poetic truth, or there is no truth in poetry. There is poets are liars, because it is twice removed from reality. These are the concepts of Plato, his teacher. But Aristotle is cutting that point by saying that poetry conveys deep truths, okay, as it is representing the life with artistic representations. Poetry offers catharsis, purging emotions and providing clarity. Uh, he is agreeing with his teacher that poetry conveys emotions. But Aristotle has another point, a different point, that it is catharsis. While watching tragedy or while watching there is a serious or a very tragic scene, what is happening in the mind of the readers or the audience? That is, they are being purgated with that emotion, or that emotion will be purified in the mind of the audience. That is, if a person uh, is watching a tragedy, and in that tragedy the hero is killed, naturally that is an emotion, a kind of emotion will be there in the mind of the audience. But Aristotle is telling that the audience will think about the death of the hero. What happens to the hero? Why this death has happened? Why he has been killed? Then he will avoid such situations in his life. That is the purification of emotions according to Aristotle, or catharsis. Observations on tragedy, its origin. It's very important that Aristotle favored tragedy a lot, and his observations on tragedy um, is very important. Then, according to him, tragedy is the most developed genre of literature. And regarding the history of tragedy, we know that it has been developed from ancient choral hymns or dithyrambs dedicated to Dionysus. Dionysus is an ancient Greek god. In order to invoke Dionysus, a kind of choral hymns were sung by a group of people or singers. From that songs or hymns, this tragedy has been evolved. At first, it was performed as a part of religious festivals. Later, it has been developed into tragedy. Early tragedies had a single actor. We know that at first it was a one actor uh, play. There's only one actor were there. One actor was there in a tragedy. Later, it has been expanded or developed into multi-actor plays. Two important people or two important writers of tragedy in ancient Greece were Aeschylus and Sophocles. They have contributed much to tragedy. Observations on tragedy, its characteristics. Tragedy is a serious imitation of a significant action. Tragedy is serious, and there is action. Action is also very important in a tragedy. It uses elevated language and dramatic elements. According to Aristotle, there is the hero of a tragedy should be a person of some noble quality. In order to represent such a life, an elevated language is needed. Dramatic elements will also be there because it's tragedy. Some unexpected things will be there. Has a complete structure with the beginning, middle, and end. For a tragedy, there will be well-defined beginning, middle, and an end. It invokes pity and fear among the audience. It leads to catharsis of purification of those emotions in the audience. We have already said about catharsis or purification of emotion. Observations on tragedy, its constituent parts. Which are the constituent parts, ingredients of a tragedy? The first and most important part of a tragedy is the plot. Plot is almost known as a story. Plot, the word or the Greek substitute of plot is mythos. Greek word for plot is mythos. The arrangement of incidents in the story is known as plot. The arrangement of incidents in the story is known as plot. The next important thing is character, that is ethos. Moral and ethical values of individuals are questioned here. Characters will be there. and they represent some kinds of moral and ethical values. Then thought is also very important. Diania is the Greek version of thought. Ideas and themes expressed. So here thought means ideas and themes are known as thought. Then diction, that is lexis, melody, melos, and spectacle, opsis are other uh, dramatical elements or important constituent parts of a tragedy. Observations on tragedy, the structure of the plot. A well-structured tragedy has a beginning, middle, and end. Events should follow a cause and effect sequence. Everything that is happening in a tragedy is in the cause and effect sequence. That is, everything will have a reason behind it. The climax should be preceded by a complication and followed by a resolution. So we know that in a tragedy, the tragic hero has to meet a tragedy, and he is the same person who is responsible for his own tragedy. Okay, so at last a complication will be there at the climax, and a resolution or the solution of this tragedy will be there in the resolution. Unity of action ensures coherence in the plot. Unity of action is there for tragedy, that is action that is completed. Simple and complex plot. Simple plot means a straightforward progression without reversal or recognition. We can see what is meant by reversal and recognition later in this slide. A complex plot involves twists, turns, and emotional revelations. Everything will be there in a complex plot. Peripeteia, there is a sudden reversal of fortune, is known as peripeteia. That is in a complex plot. Peripeteia is a very important component. Anagnorisis is another important component for a tragedy. That's a moment of realization or recognition. So these are very important in a tragedy. Peripeteia, there is a sudden reversal of fortune. We know that in King Lear, what is happening is that the king believed his daughters, but at last the king is being abandoned by his first two daughters. So a reversal of fortune is there for that king. He is in the uh, street after the dejection of his daughters. So this is the reversal of fortune there, that is a peripeteia. Then anagnosis is a moment of realization or recognition. After this peripeteia, what is happening to King Lear is that he begins to think about his life, what has happened in his life, or a kind of recognition is there in the mind of King Lear. That is both of his daughters, that is first two daughters, were misleading him, and they were actually hypocrites. So this is a kind of recognition or anagnosis that has happened in the life of King Lear. Then we have to analyze the tragic hero. Tragic hero is very important because without him that there won't be any tragedy at all. So the tragic hero should be a noble figure with a tragic flow or hamartia. The tragic flow of the hero or tragic hero is known as hamartia. Uh, in most of the ancient Greek dramas, hamartia was hubris or pride. The hero will be pride, and that causes his own fall. But in Shakespearean tragedies, Hamartia is different. That is, in King Lear, his over love towards or trust towards his daughters. That is his Hamartia. And in Othello, there is his jealous. Okay, it is his Hamartia. Then in Macbeth is greed, is the Hamartia. Then in Hamlet, what is happening? That is his procrastination. That is his inertia. Almost is not at all doing anything in proper time. That is his amertia or tragic flow. So a tragic flow should be there in a hero. That is, a hero should be a person of noble quality. He should be good but not too good. and there should be a flaw or a weakness in a tragic hero that is responsible for his own fall that is happening in a tragic hero or in a tragedy. Experiences downfall due to fate and personal error. Okay, sometimes the fate plays vital roles. In the case of Oedipus, Sophocles' Oedipus Rex is a very important tragedy, or Aristotle has been very much influenced by the Sophocles Oedipus Rex. So in Oedipus Rex, we know that fate plays an important role. Fate is almost like the um, tragic flow or hamartia there. Then, or the hero's suffering, and the hero should have to suffer out of his hamartia. There is some of the examples of tragic heroes. Some of the most important tragic heroes in the world of literature are Oedipus, Hamlet, Macbeth, King Lear, Othello, etc. Aristotle has his own opinion or viewpoint on comedy also. According to him, comedy imitates the ridiculous aspects of human behavior. He supports a tragedy very much, and he is not at all interested in comedy. That is why he is telling that it's a kind of uh, imitation of the ridiculous aspects of human behavior. But what is tragedy? It is an imitation of a noble action of the tragic hero. But here it is ridiculous. Comedy is ridiculous, according to Aristotle. Unlike tragedy, it deals with common people and everyday scenarios. We know that he has described tragedy as uh, happening in the life of a tragic hero. He should be noble. Tragedy is something noble, but comedy is happening among the common people, so there is no nobility in comedy. It is meant to entertain and provoke laughter. The only thing or the only purpose of comedy is to produce laughter among the audience. Aristotle viewed comedy as less serious but still valuable. So according to him, comedy is less serious as far as tragedy is concerned, or while we are comparing to tragedy, comedy is less serious, but it has its own value because it's a kind of art. Epic is also very important uh, during the Aristotelian period. According to him, epic poetry is grander in scale than tragedy. It has multiple plots and a vast setting. Okay, uh, a lot of plots will be there, a lot of stories will be there in an epic. The language is also very elevated, and the hero will be hero will be of some noble characteristics. So everything is there for epic. Um Example: Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. The style of poetry. Poetry should be written in an elevated and artistic manner, and the language of poetry should be a refined or elevated one. The use of metaphors and vivid imagery enhances impact. So we know that the poet is free to use metaphors and other figures of speech to make the language more refined or more elevated. Tragic dialogue should balance natural speech with poetic refinement. So the dialogue should be poetic in nature. Rhetorical devices enrich the meaning and aesthetics. So the poetical devices, like all the other figures of speech or poetic devices, make the tragedy more beautiful and elevated. Tragic dialogue should balance natural speech. Okay, so all these elements should be there in a tragedy or in poetry. These are his observations on style. Let us analyze. Is there any value for Aristotle's criticism? Is it relevant today? Aristotle's Poetics laid the foundation for literary criticism. Plato was there, but he is abusing poetry, and he is very much interested in some other things like history and philosophy. But Aristotle is very much interested in tragedy or literature. It laid foundation for literary criticism. His analysis of plot, character, and catharsis is still relevant. Even now, we are defining these elements in Aristotelian terms. As according to Aristotle, plot is so and so, or character is so and so, like that. It helps writers craft compelling narratives. Even now, uh, people are following Aristotle's points of view on tragedy or poetry while they are dealing with the criticism. His ideas influence modern drama, film, and storytelling, everything. Then, even now, we know tragedy is abundant. A lot of tragedies are there. So, they are following Aristotelian concept of tragedy. So, Aristotle's criticism is very important even now. So these are the main points of Aristotelian concepts of poetry or tragedy. Once again, I am telling you, while watching this video, please write down notes. Otherwise, you will forget it soon. Okay, thank you. Bye bye.